Recording in progress.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone. Shalom, everyone. I'm just going to... Okay, I got my camera on. Excellent. Everyone else, good to see you. Let me fix my name. Okay, thank you all for joining me on this cold winter morning. Hope you're warm and cozy wherever you are. And continuing our class and our subject of the greatest Jewish gifts to the world. Obviously, they're God's gifts through the Torah, but from the Torah to the Jewish people, we share this with the entire world. And today we're going to talk about the Mitzvah of Siddhaka, also known as charity, also known as philanthropy. So it's no secret that Jews tend to be very philanthropic. Jews tend to be very charitable. Jews tend to be very generous and very giving. I'm going to begin with a quote from Maimonides. Maimonides says, "Me'olam lo re'inu," we have never seen nor heard of a Jewish community that does not have a tzedakah fund. This is what Maimonides wrote 850 years ago. And it's true as it was then until today. You go into any Jewish community. Here in our community, we have a federation, we have Jewish Family Services, we have multiple organizations. There isn't a community, a Jewish community around the world that does not have an array, a host of charitable communal funds, whether it's free loan societies, whether it's charity funds, whether it's organizations that help the sick or the needy or the poor, whatever it may be. This is a Jewish institution that obviously stems all the way back from the Torah. But I'll give you one just practical example of this, how embedded and how rooted charity is in the Jewish psyche and the Jewish consciousness and the Jewish behavior and mindset. If you go into a non-Jewish home, what do kids have in their bedroom? A piggy bank. Piggy bank is obviously where they collect money and save money for themselves. But if you go into a Jewish bedroom of a child in a Jewish home, you'll find that tzedakah box, a charity box. This idea that charity is not just something you make a donation or you go to a fundraiser, but it's something you practice every day of your life. You set aside a portion of money, and you even teach children to put a penny or a nickel or a dime or a quarter. So every day you have to stop and think about other people. And it has to be part of your daily living to think about helping others. And that's the whole idea of a tzedakah box. And I want you to know that obviously, I'm sure we all have tzedakah boxes in our homes. There are some people who keep a little charity box in their car. And in addition to that, the Lubavitcher Rebbe had a special campaign or spoke about the idea that there should be a charity box specifically in the kitchen. And many people do have charity boxes in their kitchens. And he says, when you sit down to a meal as a family, you should first put some money in the tzedakah box to remind yourself that we're now going to enjoy God's food and God's bounty and God's blessings and prosperity in our home. There are people maybe who have less than us. There are people, we're now going to put aside charity. I'm going to tell you a remarkable true story. There's a man who passed away just the past year, maybe a year ago. I'm sure you heard his name. His name is Sheldon Adelson, of blessed memory. Sheldon Adelson was one of the wealthiest Jews of our generation, maybe even one of the wealthiest people. I mean, he was worth over $20 billion. And he supported many, many causes, especially causes connected to the land of Israel. He's from Las Vegas, big casino owner. I'm sure you've heard of Sheldon Adelson. His wife, Miriam, is now carrying on his life work with his children as well. And he was a huge Zionist and supported many, many causes in Israel. And one of the causes that he was like a partner in, together with other major philanthropists, was Birthright Israel. He has donated, I can't even tell you how much, but obviously, hundreds of millions of dollars over the years to Birthright Israel. He's considered one of the founders of Birthright Israel, together with the Bronfmans and some other major families. And he was once at a Birthright dinner, and he told a story why he came to support Birthright. And he told the following story, and I think this really is an example of the power of tzedakah. He says, my father was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia. He was a poor taxi driver. He would leave early in the morning and do 12, 14-hour shifts to support our family. We were always struggling to make ends meet. And he says, I have this memory when he would come home late at night sometimes from a day of driving taxi. This was before Uber, before credit cards. You paid the taxi with cash. He says, my father had pockets filled with bills from a whole day's driving. He said he would come into the house, and the first thing he would do, he would walk over to the J&F blue and white box that sat on our windowsill. And he would start taking dollar bills from his fears and stuffing it into the box every day. And he said, one day I turned to my father and I said, Dad, we don't even have enough for ourselves in our home. Why are you putting your hard-earned money into the box? And he said to me, and this is Sheldon Adelson speaking at a Birthright dinner, now a multi-billionaire. He says, my father looked at me and he said words that have stayed with me my whole life. My father said, Sheldon, always remember that whatever you have in life, be grateful, because there are always people who have less than you. You see, our human tendency is to look at people who have more than us and be envious. But his father said, no, maybe we don't have much, but there are actually people who have less than us. And therefore, we have to be grateful for what we have, and we have to give charity. He says, my father always wanted to go to Israel, but he couldn't afford the fear to go to Israel. And he said he died never having gone to Israel. And he said, so the first time I went to Israel as a young man, he said, my father and I happened to have had the same shoe size, 9D. He says, I went into my father's closet and I took out a pair of his shoes and I put them on and I boarded the El Al flight and I traveled to Israel and walked the country, its length and its breadth in my father's shoes, bringing my father's memory and his presence to Israel, the country he loved so much and gave to with all his heart and soul. And he said, that's why I've chosen to support Birthright Israel, because I believe that every Jew should have the privilege to do what my father never got to do because he couldn't afford an airfare ticket to Israel. He was so poor. Now this man, Sheldon Adelson, and his foundation gives hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to Jewish causes and non-Jewish causes as well. But it all started with that tzedakah box in the windowsill and the example that his father showed him by putting money into that tzedakah box. And one of the things we're going to learn in this class is, we're going to learn a lot of things, but one of the things we're going to learn about is who has to give charity and how much do you have to give charity. And what you're going to be surprised perhaps to learn, and this is another unique concept of Jewish charity versus secular charity, because Jewish concept of charity is very unique and different than what we think of as charity in the secular world. And that is, in Jewish law, a poor person must also give charity. You can't say, well, I'm poor, so I'm exempt. The Jewish law says, even if you rely on charity, you depend on charity to survive, you must take a portion of what you received, no matter how small it is, and give charity. There's no such thing as a human being who doesn't give charity. Charity is incumbent on every single person. So if you think of taxes in our country, right? If you earn a certain low bracket of income, you're exempt from paying taxes because we're not going to tax you if you make so little. Not so charity. Charity, every Jew is obligated. And we're going to have to ask ourselves why. Thank you, Professor Greg. We have to ask ourselves why. If I'm dependent on charity, why would I give back some of that money? I'll never forget. I once had this experience. A person in the community came to me. He was having some real hard times, significant trouble, and needed a significant amount of money. And we have a fund at the synagogue to help people. And I wrote this person a nice size check, not in the hundreds, in the thousands, to help this person. The person was very grateful. He has a family. Then next day, we get a call at the synagogue from his wife. And, hi, what can we do? She said, I would like to make a donation to the shul. And we said, okay, great, And the office administrator tells me that his wife gave a nice donation, which turned out to be 10% of what I had given her husband the day before. And at first, I was like, 1 minute, he needs the money. Like, why is he giving it back? Well, keep it. You need it. I know you need it. I sort of felt bad for him. But then I said, you know what? He's absolutely right. Because just because he's down on his finances, does that mean he should be deprived of the mitzvah of Siddhaka? Does that mean he should not? It's bad enough he can't afford whatever he can't afford, but now he should lose out on the joy and the feeling of being able to be a contributor to this world, to be able to not just take, but to give back to the world, the dignity that gives a person, the joy that gives a person, the fulfillment that it gives a person. Why should, just like a person needs food to eat and other living expenses, they need to feel that their life is making a difference and having an impact and helping others. That's part of the fabric of what the Torah's destiny and purpose for man. So why should he not have that? And he was right, because Jewish law says even somebody who depends on charity must also give charity. Truth be told, he went above and beyond. 10% was not necessarily the requirement in his circumstance, but the point he got was correct. He should participate and have a tremendous respect for that decision, because I know how much they needed the money, but yet they parted with a significant portion of the income. But let's go to a question that the Talmud says. The Talmud says that King David said to God, Almighty God, Tiyasher olamcha b'shava, a master of the universe, establish equity in your world by making rich and poor the same. Have you ever thought of this philosophical question? God made the world. He surely could have made, when the Jews were in the desert, they got manna from heaven, and everyone received the exact same portion. It was based on the head count of the members of your family. That's how much manna you got from heaven. But today, people use the term manna from heaven, like a windfall is called manna from heaven. Unexpected gains is called manna from heaven, right? But the way God runs the world today, different people get different amounts of money from God. Now, obviously, we're starting with the belief that money comes from God. Yes, you work hard and make a vessel, but God sends the blessings. So why does one person make $1 million and one person makes $50,000 and one person makes 10 million and whatever amounts? Why are they rich and poor? That was King David's question. Why not create the world with equity, with fairness, with justice? Justice would say that everyone should receive the same amount. Why does one person deserve a better life, a more affluent life, a more comfortable life than the next person? Why does one person have to struggle to survive and another person has an abundance? It doesn't seem fair. Where is God's justice? If God is the source of blessings, why doesn't he bless everyone equally? What King David was asking was, why didn't God create a communist world where everyone gets the same amount? Now, communism tried to solve that problem by making everyone receive the same amount, but God could have done that originally by just giving everyone the same amount of blessings. If anyone wants to try answering why you think God, and we'll get to God's answer to King David, but if you have an answer, by all means, put it in the chat box. So the answer ultimately is, and that imagine a world where everyone got equal amounts. Let's see what Pablo says. Some get more because they are better distributors. Without a deficit, you don't know how to be grateful for what you have. We are custodians. Oh, we have a very learned group here. You guys are all on the right track. I want you to try to imagine a world where everyone has everything they need. So I think it was Pablo who just said, well, then you would never appreciate when you get a blessing because you would always have what you need. And indeed, when it came to the manna, the Jews were not happy in the desert. They complained about the manna. However, in addition to that you wouldn't be grateful for when you achieve something, when you succeed, when you accomplish, when you earn, when you are blessed. In addition to that, you know what the world would be lacking if everyone had what they need? It would be lacking kindness. Because if everyone has what they need, there's no opportunity to help one another. And by the way, it's not just about money. It's about everything. A lot of people are dealing with corona, COVID, or any illness, right? So when you are hit with COVID and you have no energy and you're laying in bed, you rely on your family, on your friends to come and cook you food and help you, and right? And then the healthy help those who are weak, right? And sick. And in every area of life, there are imbalances. The people have a lot of wisdom and they could guide people who perhaps, or people with experience could guide people without experience. In every field of life, there's an opportunity to not only take, but to give. And therefore, what God wanted was a world of kindness. As it actually says, Olam Chesed Yibana, the world was built on the foundation of kindness. If everyone had what they needed, there was no lacking, there was no deficiencies, there was no deprivation, then there would be no opportunity to be givers. And when you look at yourself in the mirror, of course, we're all givers and takers. God wants us to be both givers and takers. But we have to ask ourselves, what am I primarily? Am I primarily a giver or a taker? And how do you know what you are primarily, a giver or a taker? Very simple. Do you look for opportunities to take more than to give? Or do you look for opportunities to give more than to take? When you walk into any situation that you find yourself in, any relationship, any circumstances, your question is, what can I take from this? What can I receive for myself? Or how can I make a contribution? How can I give? When you come home to your spouse, is your thought, what can my spouse do for me? Or what can I do for my spouse? When you come to work in the morning, is your thought, what can my boss do for me? Or what can I do for my company, for my boss, for my job? And the same thing with every relationship you're in. And if your focus is to be giving, then you will find infinite opportunities to give. And give doesn't just mean money. Give could be as simple as holding a door for somebody and showing them some respect. And there's a million opportunities to give constantly. So God wanted us to be givers. You know why? Because what does it say in the beginning of Bereshit? Every human being is created in the image of God. You know what it means to be in the image of God? In one word, to be a giver. You know why? Because there's only one, I don't want to say person because he's not a person. There's only one being that is purely a giver, and that's God. Because God lacks nothing. There's nothing you can give to God. So God is the ultimate giver. So to be in God's image means to be a giver. You know why you're so happy when you're a giver? Why do you feel joy and pleasure when you give to others? Because you are being like God. And the more you're in the image of God, the happier you are because you're fulfilling your potential, your true being. You're in touch with your true essence. When you take, you feel sometimes, if you overtake, you feel selfish. Because you know that to be God-centered means to be a giver. And you know why you get the greatest pleasure when you give your children? Because that's what God does all day. He gives his children, mankind, everything they need. Everything, look around the world, the oxygen you're breathing right now, you may not be aware of it. You know, I just came back from Vail, Colorado. So when it comes to the high altitudes, a lot of people have trouble breathing. So every store, every ski shop, they sell oxygen in a bottle. For $16.99, you could get 100 bursts of oxygen. It's a big business in Colorado, oxygen. You walk outside, Hashem doesn't charge you for the oxygen. It comes naturally to you. The air, the water, everything is free. God is giving us even when we don't realize he's giving us. If he held back the oxygen for 1 minute, we would realize what we're lacking. So he gives such an abundance that we don't even realize that he's giving to us constantly. He's giving us energy. He's giving us strength. He's giving us brain function, heart function. I mean, I could go on and on, obviously. The point is that God is constantly giving, 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 and especially to humankind, his children. That's the whole purpose of his giving for us. He made the whole world for us. He's giving the inanimate objects too what they need. He's giving the botany and the vegetation what they need. And he's giving the animals what they need too. But the whole focal point of creation is man, to have man in this world, make a dwelling place for God and to fulfill God's commandments and bring God into this world. So everything he created is for us. That's why God made the world in 6 days. And on the last day, he made man. The rabbis say, why the last day? So everything should be prepared for man when he enters into the world. We're like the guest. You know, I'm going to a wedding tonight, right? I'm going to show up at 4:00. Everything's going to be set. The music, the flowers, the tables are going to be set to all the chuppah will be up. The food will be cooked and laid out beautifully, right? I show up as a guest, but the caterers were working from the minute Shabbat was over, cooking and preparing, and the florist was setting up, and the designers and everything else. God brought us into the world when everything was set. He made the party. He made the world complete. And when we stepped in, when Adam stepped in, everything was made for him. So God makes things for us in advance, even before we were even created. You know, our daughter Malka is expecting a baby, thank God, right? You think about a baby, right? The baby arrives in this world. The parents have been already for months, not even 9 months, even more, working towards and planning and all the doctor visits and all the nutrition and everything, just so when this baby comes, everything's ready. The baby should be born healthy in a prepared world. That's the way God treats us. He gives to us even before we were born. King David has beautiful words in the book of Psalms, Terem Yiladaticha Yidadaticha, which means even before you were born, I knew you in your mother's womb. I've been taking care of you even before you came into existence. That's how far back God has been giving you. So God is the ultimate giver. For us to be in God's image means that we should be givers like God. I'm going to tell you a powerful story. Have any of you listened, I'm sure you have, to the music of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach of blessed memory? He was a very soulful artist, singer, composer, but he was also a remarkable storyteller, And he was a very deep soul. I had the good privilege of meeting him a number of times, going to some of his concerts. I loved his music, even when I was a teenager. And Shlomo Carlebach, you could hear his music and hear his stories online today. And he was a very spiritual man, and he was actually a very charitable man. He was known to, he was an artist, a rabbi, a songwriter, a performer. They say he died penniless. He gave away all his money to charity. Like, he would stop on the streets, give beggars his money. He was a big giver. And when he used to tell stories about beggars, he would say, and the holy beggar, he always used to call the beggars holy. And the holy beggar, and he's strumming his guitar, the holy beggar. So someone once asked him, why do you call beggars holy beggars? And I want you to listen to the story, because if you listen to it, you'll never look at a beggar on I-95 exit the same. But you have to really take the story to heart. He says, the Talmud says that God could have made every human being rich. Everyone could have had whatever they need. So why did God make some with more and some with less? Because God wanted a world of kindness, that there could be givers and takers, so we could all experience chesed. So God needed to create poor people. So Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach says, in heaven, God is creating souls to go down into the world. And God says, okay, I need people who are willing to be rich. And they will have the role in life to be successful and wealthy and give charity to the poor. Who's ready to be rich? And everyone raised their hand. Oh, I'll take that role of being rich. I'll be the rich guy who gives charity, no problem. Get a lot of honors, a lot of plaques at dinners. I'll be a, important person. It'll be great. Hopefully when that soul comes down, it remembers the promise I made in heaven that it's going to give a lot of charity, and it does. But then God says, okay, now I need some people who are ready to volunteer to be beggars, because we need rich and poor. So who's ready to play the role in this world of being a poor man? And he said, and this beggar raised his hand and said, okay, God, to fulfill your destiny in this world, to have your master plan of givers and takers, charity, kindness, chesed is the word, Sadaka, I'm willing to take on that role of being the poor man, to go through life and with hardship and struggle, so your purpose can be fulfilled and people can have the opportunity to enable people to give tzedakah. And God says, okay, you'll be the poor man. Said Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, is he not a holy beggar? He agreed to go through a life of hardship to enable you to do the mitzvah of tzedakah. He's a holy beggar. And the Talmud says it so beautifully. The Talmud says, Yoter mimasha balabayit oseh im ha'ani, more than the master of the house does with the poor man, or for the poor man. Ha'ani, the poor man, oseh im ha'balabayit, does for the master of the house. Talmud saying a rich man or a comfortable man or woman invites a poor man into his home and gives him a nice meal. The rich man thinks he's the giver, or the master of the house thinks, I'm the giver. I just fed this poor man. Says what the Talmud? More than you did for him, he did for you. He gave you more than you gave him. You know why? You gave him something physical, food, drink, maybe a bed to sleep. He gave you something spiritual, infinitely more valuable. And we're not even talking about the reward in the next world for the mitzvah of charity. That goes without saying. We're talking about the meaning and the dignity and the joy and the fulfillment of being a giver. Because giving makes you feel like God. It's a godly act to give. And that's why you naturally feel good. And obviously this is a message in every generation, but I think even more so today, where there's so much focus on consumption and materialism and acquisition and more for ourselves. I think we lose sight somewhat of the real joy in life, which comes from doing for others, for giving. And giving is a cycle. The more you give, the happier you are. And the happier you are as a human being, the more you give. So it's a positive, vicious cycle. And so helping others, and it doesn't only have to be money, there's volunteering, and there's just caring about people and doing for people. You know, we had Rebbitzin Slavic Youngreis speaking at the shul yesterday, and her mother was the late Rebbitzin Esther Youngreis. And she said before her mother died, she did one of her last interviews with a journalist. She was a famous Rebbitzin, you may know about her. And a reporter said to her, Rebbitzin Esther Youngreis, she was a Holocaust survivor from Bergen-Belsen. He said, what do you want to be written on your tombstone when you die? And the daughter said, she was listening to the interview. She got the chills. What kind of question is that? What do you want written on your tombstone? You know what she said? I want them to write, I cared. I cared. To be a caring person, that's what tzedakah is, to care about another person. So David wants to know, why is it that there are poor people, and God says that there could be chesed, there could be kindness in the world. Now we get to the technicalities. How much tzedakah do we have to give? So you may be familiar with the word tzedakah. That's a very famous word, charity. But I want to first start by pointing out something that someone said on the chat, and that is that the word tzedakah, the root of the word is not charity. I'm not sure what charity means. You could look it up in the Webster Dictionary. It's some kind of voluntary, charitable. I know philanthropy in Greek means love of mankind. And that's what charity is. But the word tzedakah, what is the root of the word tzedakah? Tzedek. What does the word tzedek mean? You ever heard the verse tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, justice, justice you shall pursue? So if I ask you the translation of the word tzedakah, and you say charity, not really, not accurate. If you want to know the real translation of the word tzedakah, justice. Now, what's the difference? The difference is when you gave that poor man money, did you do an act of charity or an act of justice? Judaism says it's justice. Why? Charity implies I'm charitable, I'm philanthropic, I'm generous, I'm going above and beyond my call of duty, beyond my responsibility. Tzedek means I did what is just, what is required of me, what is mandatory. Because as someone said, what does tzedakah do? It changes also it's not about only the money you gave away. It changes your view and perspective on the money you kept for yourself. Now, in the Jewish law, you have to give 10% of your earnings to charity. That's net. After you paid your taxes and everything, whatever you take home, 10% that has to go to charity. So you keep 90%, you give away 10%. And there's a story in the Talmud where the Talmud says about a person who didn't want to give charity. God says, listen, you have a choice. You could have it whichever way you want. You could either give away 10% and keep 90%. Or if you're not willing to play the role of the giver, I could give you the role of the receiver. I'll let someone else get 90%, and you'll receive 10%. So be happy that you could be the giver. This is one of my rabbinic struggles, I guess. Sometimes there could be certain wealthy people that when you come to them, like, everyone's coming to me all the time, like I can't, it's too much, right? And I get that. But the point is that I sometimes think to myself, like, why do you think everyone's coming to you? Obviously, you're a very wealthy person with a lot of capacity. Like, that's not something to complain about. You're one in I don't know how many million who has this kind of wealth. Like, why do you think it was given to you? Just that you should keep it in your own bank account for yourself? Like, there's a reason everyone's coming to you. You're blessed. be grateful that everyone's coming to you, because if you were just an average guy, nobody would be lining up at your door. So don't view it as a negative that, oh, everyone's coming to me for money. Yeah, if you want, someone else could take that role of being the billionaire and you could just be an average guy and don't bother that guy. Would you prefer that? So, and God gave you something. He entrusted you with something. That's the Jewish view. You are not an owner. You are a guardian. You are a custodian. You know, in a civil law, sometimes you become a guardian for someone else's estate. It's not your decision how to spend the money. There are rules, there are regulations, there are guidelines. You have to be true to the one who gave you this estate to distribute and utilize the money accordingly. Well, if you view your possessions as God gave me this, they're not mine. The proof that it's not yours is that you can't take it with you. There comes a day that you have to relinquish it all. You have it for a period of time, and God is the owner. So it keeps you humble. It makes you realize it's not me. It's God blessed me with these. So let's say some rich guy dies and he leaves you $1 billion to be the custodian of. Do you walk around haughty? Say, I have $1 billion. You didn't earn that money. God, someone gave it to you and you're just a custodian. Now, you may have earned your money, but it's God's blessings that led you to that success. And talk to people who are successful, and they'll often tell you, they'll admit that as smart as they are, there was a lot of mazel in being at the right place at the right time, and it started flowing, and there was no stopping it. It just came their way. So an honest person will admit to you that, yeah, I'm a smart guy. I worked hard, but no question, it takes dedication. You don't make money without being hardworking, but this wasn't my doing. This was beyond what I could have done. Hashem blessed me, right? So Hashem put these resources in my possession, and I have a duty, a responsibility to distribute a portion of it to charity. And it's justice. But here's where it goes deeper. If you don't give charity, you've done an injustice. So just like if you don't give your allotted amount of taxes, you've committed a crime and you'll go to jail for tax evasion because you did something illegal. You're obligated to give a certain portion of your income to the government for whatever they need there. Same thing with the Jewish view of tzedakah. If you don't give tzedakah, it's not just, oh, I'm not so charitable, I'm not so generous. No, you stole from the poor man, because the way we look at it is that money is just entrusted in your hands to give to the poor man. If you don't give it to the poor man, you're robbing the poor man of his just due, and you committed an injustice. And that's the view of tzedakah as being tzedek. But in addition to tzedakah, there's a concept, as you know, of maser. In the olden days, people had fields, agricultural society, and they had to give 10% tithing. Today, we don't have fields necessarily, so it's called maser ksafim, the tithe of the money. As I told you, 10% of your income has to go to charity. Now check. Now, what is the difference between tzedakah and maser? If you read the Torah's laws about tzedakah, it means if you encounter a poor man and he needs charity, you must help him. But what happens if you don't encounter any poor people? Nobody comes to you for help. So the Torah says, whether or not somebody comes to you, you must seek out the needy person. You know, yesterday in synagogues around the world, we blessed the month of Adar. Tomorrow night, we'll start 2 days of Rosh Chodesh Adar. What's the holiday of Adar? Purim. What's the commandment of Purim? 2 commandments, many commandments. Read the Megillah, but there's also giving shalach manos, gifts to one another, and matanot levyonim, giving charity to the poor. And what's so unique about the holiday of Purim is that it's the one day that every Jew is running around looking for a poor person. And I got to tell you, in Palm Beach, it's not so easy to find poor people sometimes, but they're doing me a favor when they come and take the check, because I have an obligation on the day of Purim to give charity to at least 2 poor people. So on a normal day, today I got up. I'm not thinking, where can I find the poor person that needs tzedakah? I'm driving on Okeechobee and a red light, someone asks for tzedakah, I may give him some charity. Or somebody knocks on my door and says, Rabbi, I need tzedakah, I'll give him tzedakah. Okay, if they come around in the synagogue with the pushka, I'll put $1 in the tzedakah box. But I'm not running around looking for poor people. On Purim, every Jew has to find poor people to give tzedakah to, whether they come to you or not. You can't let the sun set without finding someone to give charity to. So tzedakah means I encounter a person who needs money, I help them out. Maser means whether someone approaches you or not, you have to seek out people to give charity to, and you have to give a minimum of 10% of your charity to tzedakah. Now, we mentioned that there's a benefit to the giver, because giving obviously makes you grateful for what you have. It makes you godlike. It also keeps you humble and keeps the proper perspective that all the money you have and everything you have is from Hashem. But the ultimate goal of charity is to help the poor person. And here's the way the Talmud says something very, very interesting. The Talmud says, if you're walking down the street and you lose some money, you had a stack of cash, $100, $200, and you lost it. And you go back to look for it and you can't find it. And you regret losing it. And a poor man finds your money and goes and enjoys your money that he finds, the cash. The Talmud says, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of tzedakah, charity. Now you may say, I didn't even know who found it. I didn't want to give it to the person. I even felt regret that I lost the money. But the Talmud says the fact is your resources provided for a poor man. That's the bottom line. And therefore you gave tzedakah. And what the Talmud is trying to saying is that, a lot of times people get into, well, what are the intentions of the giver? What are the motivations? Are they pure? Are they righteous? And of course, you should do it for the right motivation. You shouldn't do it for honor. You shouldn't do it for recognition. That's not what it's about. But at the end of the day, the poor man doesn't care what your motivations are. You could have all the wrong motivations for giving charity. To the poor man, it makes no difference. The bottom line is he has food to eat. He has what he needs. So ultimately, when it comes to charity, more than anything else, it's the generosity, it's the act of kindness that really is what's most important. Now, here comes a very practical question. And the question is, and I see there are a number of questions in the chat, so we're going to get to some of these questions that people posed. The question is, what's if I feel, I barely have enough for myself? Maybe I'm not in the position to give charity. And here we come to a question of true self-evaluation. And every person has to make this evaluation on their own. Someone comes to you for a request, they need money, or you see a need in the community or in someone's life. Now, if you have a lot of surplus, extra income sitting in the bank and you're a wealthy person, okay, no big deal, I'll write them a check. But what's if I get by paycheck to paycheck? I don't really have all this extra income. Now I have to look at my lifestyle and say, okay, are there things in my life that are not really necessities? That I could give up something that's not a necessity to help this person get their necessities? In other words, when do your luxuries take precedent over someone else's necessities? So if someone else, I'm giving you just the example, someone else doesn't have bread and water to eat and drink. And you say, well, I like going to restaurants. Once a week, I like going to a restaurant. But maybe if I don't go out to eat once a week, I could take that extra money and help this poor person. Does your eating out in the restaurant come before that person's necessities? And every person has to determine on their own, are your vacations necessities, are whatever luxuries we have in our lives. And that's where the real test of generosity is. What are you willing to forego in your life for the sake and the benefit of somebody else? And again, Jewish law says that even a poor person must give some form of charity. But the degree of charity, this can depend on a person's assessment of what they have. And, I just want to point out that a lot of the things we consider necessities today didn't even exist in years gone by. So somebody says, well, I can't live without my cable TV, so I have to have Verizon. That costs me, let's say, whatever a month. For thousands of years, people lived without Verizon cable TV. They survived. So clearly it's not a necessity. You know what I mean? The point is that there are a lot of things we take for granted that are part of our lifestyle that we assume we can't live without. But on second thought, and if we really take the time to contemplate and to think about it, you'll realize that they are things that are not necessities necessarily. They're more like luxuries to our lives. I'm going to share with you just a interpretation on a verse that I find very helpful. When the Torah talks about the mitzvah of charity, the Torah says, when you see a poor person, don't close your heart. Lo ta'amet etz levavcha, don't close off your heart to feeling for this person. V'lo tikpotz et yadcha, don't clench your fist to hold on to your money, but rather kipasoach tiftach et yadcha, open your hand and give to the poor man, and do it, and don't feel bad that you're giving him charity. Why? Because God will bless you. And just by the way, when you go to the Torah and you make a blessing for someone who's sick, God forbid, you say, I'm going to give charity on their behalf. You know why? Because God says, there's one mitzvah you could test me, and that's charity. Say, I'm giving charity, so you send the recovery to my loved one. And I'm testing you, God. You said in the merit of charity, you're going to bless me. I'm making a donation to charity to help other people, and I want you to bless my loved one to feel better. And God says, you could test me. When we remember our loved ones, we give charity. Why do we give charity at Yizkor? Because once again, what it's saying is, if as long as I, their child, am giving charity, that means they still live on, because their life was all about giving. And if I'm still a giver, that means they live on through me. Charity is the essential, quintessential mitzvah. As a matter of fact, in the Jerusalem Talmud, it's called the mitzvah, the ultimate mitzvah, because all acts of mitzvahs are in one way or another an act of tzedakah, of kindness, of generosity. The Torah says, don't clench your fist, don't close your heart, but open up your hand. And one interpretation says, you know what it means to open up your hand? It's not just saying open your hand to give to the poor man, because it already said don't clench your fist. So obviously you're not closing your hand, you're opening your hand. But it's giving you a reason why you should give charity. You know why? Because you know what the Torah is saying? At the end of the day, every person has to open their hand. What does that mean? The Talmud says when a baby's born, they come into the world with clenched fists. You ever see a baby crying when it was born? It's holding its fist like this. When you see a person who dies, their hands are always open. The Talmud says life is going from clenched fists to open fists. We're born with the attitude of, I want to take, I want to amass, I want to gain, I want to acquire. But as we get older and more mature, we realize, you know what? It's about opening our hands. Maturity brings us to the realization that God gave us blessings, and the greatest joy of life is sharing our blessings. And ultimately, when one dies, you open your hands completely, because you leave this world the way you came in, naked and bare. You came in owning nothing. You leave the world owning nothing. And therefore, all you have is the option of what to do with these resources while you're on this earth. You have this opportunity to share your blessings in this world. There's a story told, it's sort of like a joke, but this guy dies, he comes to heaven. They can't find any good deeds. He hasn't done anything good. They don't know what to do. They have to send him to purgatory. But then a good angel comes running and says, one day he was walking home from work. It was a cold winter night in New York City. There was a poor beggar on the street begging for money. He had compassion and he took out a quarter and he gave him a quarter. So he did a good deed. We can't send him to purgatory. So the bad angel says, give him back his quarter and let him go to hell. And while it's a joke, there's a serious punchline to the joke. You know what the serious punchline is? That there are no quarters in heaven, so they couldn't give him back his quarter. There's no money in heaven, so they had to reward him because he did give a quarter. And the point of the story is, someone once said, this rich man dies, he never gave charity. He comes to heaven. The angels say, what are we going to do with you? You never gave any charity. And there's a lot of stories about rich men and poor men and misers and all sorts of stories like this. But this story is, they say, you never gave any charity. Can't send you to heaven. So the rich man says, oh, no problem. He pulls out his checkbook. He says, name the amount. I'll write a check right now. And the angels tell him, God tells him, sorry, but in this world, we don't accept checks. We only accept receipts. In the next world, you can't give charity. All you could show is the receipts of the charity you gave in this world. So this is the opportunity for tzedakah. There's a story by Yisrael Salanter. He was once on the train in Poland, and as the train was pulling off, his glove fell off onto the side of the train, onto the station, and the train was leaving. He couldn't get his glove. You know what he did? He immediately took off his other glove and threw it down next to the first glove. And he said, at least if a poor man doesn't have gloves, finds one glove, he'll have the matching pair to be comfortable. That's a mindset of charity. An instinctive, the train was leaving, but in an instant, he thought what to do under those circumstances. And he chose to do that. And that's what we have to learn. Tzedakah is not just, oh, I gave in the office. It's every day. Like I said, it's in the charity box, but it's also a mindset of that whatever I have, I'm privileged to have what I have. I'm grateful for what I have. They're like Sheldon Adelson's father told him, there are always people who have less than you. Stop looking at the people who have more than you and being envious. It's so easy to look around. You read the newspapers, this one made this and this one made that. And you could live your life with envy. Or you could say, thank God I have clothing, I have food, I have a home. I could pay. It's cold outside. Last night I turned on the heat in my house. Thank God I have heat. If it's cold, I have air. If it's hot, I have air conditioning. I'm so blessed. I'm so grateful. And if God blesses you with more, say, why is God giving me so much? Clearly, it's not for me. I can't use all of this for myself. He clearly wants me to look around me and see who I could help. I'm just going to conclude, and then if there's any time, I'll go to the commentary, to the questions. There's an interesting law in Code of Jewish Law. What happens if a man dies and in his will, he leaves all his money to one child? So you know what Jewish law says? Does that one child get all the money and the other kids don't? So if he wrote, and I don't want any of my other kids to touch my money, okay, that's his will. He's entitled to do that. But if he didn't say, I don't want any of my other kids, he just said, I leave all my money to my son, Ben or Jack. Jewish law says it's not natural. It's not normal for a parent to single out one child and exclude all the other children. Surely, you know what he meant? He didn't mean that he's leaving all the money to this child. He meant that he's appointing this child to be the executor, to be the one in charge of distributing the money equally amongst all the other children. And the message of that law is if God gave one person wealth and the next person doesn't have wealth, do you think God wants, like, yeah, I want you to have a really comfortable life. private jets, Rolls Royces, country clubs, and that other child of mine, he should sleep on a cardboard box outside. Yeah, that's what I had in mind. That was my plan. No, that's not normal. That's not what God would want. What God wants you to do, if you've been blessed with resources, is to go to that poor person who doesn't have a place to sleep and make sure he has a comfortable place to eat and to sleep and take care of him. That's what any normal parent, if one of your children, if one of our children, God forbid, one day was down on his luck and had no money, what would your parents, or what would you want as a parent? You would want one child to go take care of the other child. And I told you I would finish with the last story, but I'll finish with this story. There were two brothers. One was rich, one was poor. And every time the poor brother would call the rich brother for help, the rich brother would say, no, I can't. Always had an excuse. One day, the elderly father's dying, and both sons come running to their father's deathbed. And one is the rich man standing on one side, the poor man's on the other side. And the father leans towards the poor child and just talks to the poor child. Last conversations, wishes. And the rich child's trying to talk to his father, but the father's not responding much to him. At one point, the rich child says to his father, he says, Dad, am I not your child too? And the father looks at the rich son and he says, if he, pointing to the poor son, is not your brother, then how can I be your father? And the message of the story is God is our father if we are his children. But we're only his children if we treat each other as brothers and sisters. And the more we treat each other as brothers and sisters, the more God is our Father in heaven. So tzedakah, at least the Jewish concept of tzedakah. You know, in America, there's no law that says you must give a portion of your earnings to charity. It's a completely voluntary act. And I think, if I once remember correctly, average American gives about 2 or 3% of their money to charity. Judaism says, no, that's not enough. 10% minimum. You could give 15, you could give 20. If you're rich, you could give 50%. There are people who give a lot more, but at a minimum 10%. And ask yourself this question. If every human being on planet Earth, all 7 billion, gave 10% of their earnings to charity, as Jewish law requires, would there be any poor people left in this world? Judaism believes in capitalism. You have to earn and be successful. Judaism doesn't believe in communism because then there'll be no kindness. But with that capitalism comes the mitzvah of Siddhaka, which is unique in that it requires a minimum, a mandatory gift of 10%. So when you go over your tax returns and you see how much you earned, make sure that your charitable contributions equal 10%. And we would need another hour to talk about what is the criteria of charitable contributions. It's not just for poor people. If you support a Jewish institution, or you support sick people or other situations, there are many things that fall under the category of charitable contributions. It could be your own family members who need financial help. But 10% has to go. And the rabbis tell us, based on what the verse says, aser taser, that God says, I will reward you tenfold. That not only will you not lack, but on the contrary, you will become more successful in the merit of the mitzvah of tzedakah. I'm going to quickly see if I can answer some questions. What's if somebody's ungrateful? Oh, I like this question. I help a man who used to be homeless and now he's living in a group home. I send him sodas and he sells them. This makes me feel like I'm wasting my money. I feel like I'm constantly giving to this man, and then he's ungrateful and wasteful with what I give him. So I hear two questions here. One question, if someone's ungrateful. Other question is if they're wasting what you give them. So the second answer is obvious. If somebody's wasting what you're giving them, then obviously it's not a good way to give them tzedakah. I mean, there are people who come to me sometimes that I don't necessarily trust what they're going to do with their money. So I deliberately give them a Publix card that's only good for food and certain things that they can't go buy alcohol or cigarettes with. So obviously you don't want your money to go to waste. You have to be responsible. But the other question is, what's if the person's ungrateful? And I know I've encountered that. I'm sure you've encountered that. You give someone something, instead of saying thank you, they get upset at you. Why didn't you give them more? And it sort of makes it difficult to want to be kind to them because they're very ungrateful. And, here's what I would say. Obviously, you should never get angry at a person. You should have compassion. Maybe they're so bitter, they suffered a lot because of their poverty, their circumstances, then unfortunately they're angry and they feel you should be doing more, and they're ungrateful and they don't really know your circumstances. Maybe you're doing the best you can. But in addition to that, I've encountered that a lot of times people who are poor may have some kind of mental illness. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying poor equals mental illness, but there are a lot of homeless people, as you know, that they're homeless not because they can't work, but because they have some kind of a mental illness. And therefore, when you deal with very severely poor people, God forbid, I'm not saying anything negative about poor people. I'm saying sometimes in my experience, I guess because as a rabbi, I see a lot of people with different struggles. There could be that element. And so you always have to understand that these people may be bitter because of their circumstances, but it also could be that sometimes there are literally some other issues going on, and therefore you can't judge them. You can never judge any person, but especially not a person who's been in such a dire circumstance. I'm just so tempted to throw in one more story because I want to bring out one more point. And that is, we talk about charity, generosity with money, but I mentioned this yesterday in my sermon. What do people want more than anything else in life? And someone, when I gave the sermon yesterday, called out love. And it was the right answer. What people really want is love, dignity, respect, recognition. They want to be seen. They want to be felt. They want to feel valid. That's what human beings want. People, if I say, what do you want? Oh, I want money and success. That's not true. You want money and success because you think money and success will bring you more love and validation and value into yourself. But what you really want is the love and the recognition. So the most important thing you can give a person is love and generosity of spirit and validation. And when we talk about being generous, some people are generous with their money, but they're not generous with their words. Here's some money, but stop bothering me. You're a pest, I don't want to see you every day, What did you do? You gave him some money, but you robbed him of all his honor and dignity. Maybe it's better you didn't give him the money. Sometimes you don't have a lot to give a person. I could only spare this, but God bless you. You're such a good person. You're going to be successful. I know you're going to make it. Everything's going to work out, And that love and confidence and trust and belief that you give the person could be much more valuable than the money. So when you give tzedakah, make sure it's not just what, and the Rambam talks about 8 levels of charity. It's not just the amount, it's the spirit it's given. And sometimes the words that accompany the charity could be much more precious than the actual gift. And I'll try to squeeze in, going back to Rabbi Shlomo Kalbach, there's a story that he once was stopped by a beggar and he checked his pockets. He had no money on him. And he said, what did he say to him? He said, "Holy beggar, I'm so sorry, I have no money to give you." And the poor man said, "It's okay. You've given me more than anyone else has given me." And he said, "What do you mean? I just told you I have nothing to give you." And the poor man says, "Never in my life, sitting on these streets, begging for money, has anyone ever called me a holy beggar. Thank you for calling me a holy beggar. I never thought of myself as being holy." And the point is, sometimes your words could be more meaningful to the person than the money. And sometimes if you don't give it in the right spirit, God forbid, it's almost as better that you didn't give it to the person because you made the person feel so lowly. And sometimes we don't mean to do it. It's just like, okay, one more story and then I'll finish. There's a story about Rothschild. Time, yes, time is charity too. Time is money. If you give your time, that's charity for sure. Volunteering. A poor person once came over to Rothschild in the street. One of the Rothschilds said, Please help me out. I'm so poor. I need money. I can't feed my family. And Rothschild happened not to have money on him, but he had his gold chain on his watch. So he took the watch and he broke off the gold chain and he gave the poor man the gold chain. He said, here, take the gold chain and sell it. You'll have money. And the poor man said, Mr. Rothschild, you didn't have to break your watch and take off the gold chain. Like, I could have come to your house in the evening to get money if you don't have any money on you. And Mr. Rothschild says something very powerful. He said, right now I was very touched and moved by your plight, and I'm very inspired to give you generously. He said, I'm afraid if I tell you come to my house in the evening, by the time the evening comes, I may cool off a little bit, not be so motivated to give you as generously. So I wanted to seize the moment when I felt compassion and give you as generously as possible. And we talk about the idea of strike when the iron's hot. Strike when the iron's hot is when you have an inspiration to do a mitzvah, don't delay it. You see a plight of a poor person, it's like, not like, okay, next week or at the end of the month when I do my checks, I'll write them a check. And then you may not be feeling as motivated. Do it when you feel the most compassion and the most inspiration. Thank you all, and I hope you all have a terrific day. Thank you for joining. All the best.